You have been trained to think about sex and pleasure in a certain way, whether you are aware of it or not. You have been told that, contrary to your family growing up, when you get older, you're going to find that person who completes you, who makes you happy. You're going to have amazing sexual experiences together. You're going to create a family and have children. And then you're going to grow old together in happiness and bliss. That is what you have been sold. That is what you have been told. How accurate is that? How often does that happen? I remember when I was invited to teach abstinence classes at the junior high when I was in high school. We used to say things like, well, why would you just have one kind of ice cream? You should try lots of kinds of ice cream, meaning you should date and not get too involved with someone. But then that metaphor falls apart when they say, great, but then you should marry one person, get one type of ice cream for the rest of your life, and be completely happy with that. What sense does that make? Back to my topic. So that's how you've been trained to look at sex and pleasure. And if your experience is like mine, you realize that it's not that simple. It's not that easy. The person that you feel deeply sexually connected to or interested in may or may not be a great person you want to live with, may have different habits around cleanliness and poor financial management skills and poor child raising abilities and 100 other things that may or may not mesh between you two just because you find an erotic or sensual connection. Who said and who gave you the rule that if you want to have a deep, meaningful, powerful, erotic, and sexual connection with someone, that you need to get married, have children, have a family, have a house, white picket fence, if you can possibly afford it, and that's going to work out? Marriage works less than half the time. Of those marriages that continue to exist, many of them are unhappy, sexless, and unsatisfactory. From my perspective, it seems that maybe around 20% of marriages come close to fulfilling what we've been sold, which is basically a fantasy, basically nonsense. And so we get bitter, we get angry, we get resentful, we think there's something wrong with our partners or there's something wrong with us. We look around and we say, well, what I was taught is I should be able to do this. And so what women especially do is they go and they get more training and they learn how to be more confident and more self-assured. They learn how to communicate better, how to understand men more. And then they spend a lot of time and energy on all that, as well as their external looks. And after all of that, they hope that the next relationship will be better, which it seldom is. The average relationship, doesn't really matter how much training or skills or dedication you have to your relationship, lasts 2.9 years. And I have watched even those people in the field of conscious relationships and sexuality. They do not seem to do better. In fact, many of them are perennially single and or serial monogamists, which should actually be called serial polygamists, as Deborah Anapol said it, because they're having multiple partners. They're just doing them one at a time. The end result is that we have unsatisfactory sexual relationships, all the other aspects of life, financial management, home, child raising become car crash shit shows. We have no community or tribal support, with few exceptions. And men often become resentful and decide they're not going to form any deeper relationship with a woman because they don't understand women and their emotions, and what they want in all these different fields. They feel unable to fulfill all of the different requirements, and they find that they're not being treated well by the entire legal system. If something goes wrong, they lose their money, their income, they lose access to their children, and so over time they withdraw. Or they settle into a resentful selling themselves experience, giving up their dreams, their passion, their life, giving up what they want because they've become the donkey, the ass on which the providing for the family is laid, and they're not able to do much more than that. Work for provision, and then they can become enmeshed in video games or sports, basically trying not to rock the boat, trying to please their wife, and trying to make sure that the family is taken care of and satisfied, but their own lives are absolutely left behind the curve. Their sexual lives often degrade, lots of reasons for this. Their general satisfaction collapses, then you have the midlife crisis. He gets a new car around 40, 45. He has an affair with the secretary or the college girl. He ends up leaving his family, looking for new satisfaction and happiness. And the whole family collapses, and all the promises that were made, if they've lasted that long, come to naught. This is what we've been taught. This is what we do. This is what it looks like. And I feel like it's not a very hard sell to convince or show anyone that this isn't actually serving me or you or any of us. Even more importantly, what you've missed in all of this is the true power and structure and magic around sexuality. What the point is of eroticism, pleasure, sexuality, that has been hidden, Cask of Amontillado-esquely, behind a brick wall, sealed in, so you can barely hear the jingles of what may be possible. Again, there's many reasons for this. I get into them in other talks and other documents. Sex is for pleasure, procreation, that's it, with one person. That seems to degrade, get boring. The things that would make it exciting seem taboo or destabilizing to the relationship, and most people stick with the status quo and just jump between partners in relatively shallow engagements that are less than fulfilling one after the other. I am here to tell you that there is an entirely different paradigm available. Through my studies of Tantra, sacred sexuality, through my studies of spirituality in the Occidental realms, I have found that sex can be so much more. First of all, we achieve between 1 and 3% of our pleasure potential. That sounds ridiculous, I know. But if you're used to the 5-minute or 15-minute sexual encounter with the type of orgasm that feels a little more relieving than a sneeze quite often, and you feel less than deeply, powerfully nourished and satisfied, you haven't really experienced sexuality. 30% of American women, according to some statistics, are completely anorgasmic, unable to have orgasms. Of those that can have them, there are a group of women who can have them just alone. There are a group of women that can have only clitoral orgasms or have only experienced clitoral orgasms. There's a group of women who have experienced G-spot orgasms but never during intercourse or also just alone. There's women who have been able to experience G-spot orgasms with their partner, also maybe during sex. And then there's various other types of orgasms and experiences in all parts of the body and also in the genitals that extend beyond those types of orgasmic experiences. But the number of women who can reach and who have experience with these types of orgasmic releases and expansions is vanishingly thin. Just a few percent. And because I have dedicated my life to pleasure around 12 years ago and finding out how pleasure works and finding that I was very gifted in it and had skills in it, I've seen that we can raise that 1 or 2% to 15 or 25% with relatively little effort. And I have to admit, the vistas that are possible, none of us actually know. And a few times we encounter that transcendent, erotic, spiritual experience that takes us beyond what we thought was possible or even who we were. Something akin to an LSD or an ayahuasca trip while we're having a sexual experience is possible. There's more than that. There's probably a dozen different experiences available of degrees of movement and measurement and expression and experience of sexuality that most people have no idea exist, much less have ever been there. Nor will they ever find if they're limiting themselves to how they're having sex now, which, let's think about it. When you learn about sexuality in school, how are you actually instructed? You get the condom over the banana, you can take birth control speech, you get the abstinence speech, and that's about it. How important is sexuality and pleasure in life? What kind of training would be appropriate for something that is that important and that powerful to experience in life? It's such a driving force that many people in society jeopardize their good name, their professional standing. Anthony Weiner, Tiger Woods, Bill Clinton, the list goes on, to indulge their sexuality and their pleasure, looking for another level which they know or which they believe is available, but which they seem unable to find, and which gets them into an amazing amount of trouble. So I can tell you, pleasure can be magnified many times for men or for women. If you do not put focus on it and attention on that and actually clear the blocks to experiencing that and work with someone over time to get there, you will never have those experiences. They don't just magically appear as a rule. Sometimes they can happen through just serendipity, but more often than not, they're the result of work, just like anything else you want to do well in life. To study, to cook, to build, to create, to learn a foreign language, to learn a musical instrument. And your body is the most powerful instrument that you will ever possess or come into contact with. And so it's a shame that many of us are living at that 1% to 3% of pleasure instead of looking for the highest amount of pleasure we can experience. And that experience, that 1% to 3%, that's present everywhere. That's present in our relationships. That's what happens in our sexuality. That happens in our experiences with our bodies and our minds, our learning, our creativity, our expression. And it's a shame, because for me, these are the most important elements of existence. And so we create computers and fast cars and airplanes and all these ways to try to experience our bodies and try to get skills back and have experiences that, if we knew how to use our bodies, really they would much transcend any of these experiences. These cheap substitutes, so to speak. The movie, the food, the whatever it is. Because of the illusions and the lies around marriage and relationships that I talked about earlier, and the incredible distance between men and women from each other, from themselves, these experiences seem difficult or impossible to reach. But reaching them, experiencing them, is a key for some of the most powerful transformation, healing, clarity, and basically every other valuable, powerful experience you can have in life. I am unable to put this into words, but as Wilhelm Reich figured out when he began studying this, he was a student of Freud's in Vienna, and he took things that Freud began into a much, much deeper level and found the truth behind so much of what Freud was trying to uncover. He discovered that orgasm and sexuality and pleasure was able to completely change, rewire, heal the human nervous system, to reset, to release pain and trauma, and to enable creativity, creation, manifestation, and everything else. He was discovering what the sages of India and the shamans and the medicine people of all cultures have said for thousands of years, but which has been lost and which we're ignorant of. For that, he was persecuted, arrested, imprisoned, and probably murdered. His books were burned, his information was banished because he wouldn't present this information to the state in a way that allowed them to get even more control over people when he found out what they were doing it for, because he wanted to free people. Just as an aside. Now, sexual energy neutrally observed beyond simply the capacity to create children or the capacity to create pleasure can be used as a method to manifest. Jesus said if 2 or 3 people get together and decide and are unified about what they want, they can move mountains. And I've heard many stories about this, and I've experienced this myself. And if they catalyze erotic and sexual energy in that manifestation, it can become 10 times as powerful as it is without or as it is alone. What can be manifested through erotic energy? Money, health, healing, connections, whatever you want. Once you learn to understand your own body's energies, how they move, how they work, how to trigger them, arouse them, focus them, and manifest them, you get a quantum leap in the amount of power you have in the world as a human being. Now, the difficulty of this is we're stuck in our relationship paradigms. We're stuck in our child-raising paradigms. We're stuck in the prisons of our minds so that we can't even go to these places. We can't even consider them. We can't think about them. We can't implement them. We can't experience them, explore them, or manifest them. And until we learn to release first guilt, shame, and fear, then believe that these things are possible, and then practice the techniques which will allow you to do what I just said is possible, then you can actually get what it is I'm talking about. So a little bit of summary about what I've said so far today. And everything I've said could be the subject of a lot of study, a lot of practice, a lot of learning, a lot of understanding. But number one, our sexual and erotic pleasure and our power potential is held at 1 to 3% of where it could be. Number two, we can learn to expand that 5 times, 10 times or more if we're willing to learn and practice the principles that lead to greater pleasure and healing. Number three, sexuality can also be used for manifestation, creation, healing, and other topics. And number four, to get to those places, we have to release the conditioning and training that we have that limits us and keeps us where we are. As I've said before, I have an entire spiritual new awakening tradition that is helping us to begin to step into those paths to be able to manifest together. There are a lot of principles, guidelines, techniques, ideas, skills, and mindsets that are necessary to make that happen. And I've been digging these out over the past dozen years in studies with advanced teachers and gurus, ancient documents, and my own partners and my own body. I have put them into a system. I have put them into a structure to understand and focus and move energy for the results that we want to have. And my journey now is to share that and explore that with you, with all of us, so that we can begin creating the world that we want through the power of pleasure. Not the power of sacrifice and work and slaving away and efforting, but through the power of pleasure. That's what Christo-Tantrism is about. That's what my message is, and everything else focuses on this: our relationships with each other and the experience we have with each other in the sensory realm of our bodies. This is the most important thing, and this is going to be the path through which we heal the earth and make everything else happen. If you want more information, please come to me, please ask me. And I want to continue to have these meetings and conversations to go deeper and deeper into each of these topics. Thank you for listening.